buckos, you know what today is? My camera tilted. Today is a new church day, a new denomination day, maybe even a new cult day, depending on your perspective. We'll get there, because today I went to a church of Christian Science. To the 4 active Mormons that watch my channel, close your eyes really quick. Coffee. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another thrilling episode of Atheist Church Audit. My name is Jared, and I'm an atheist, and today I went to a church that I've never been to before. Why did I say that? No, I literally have been here before. Not to this congregation, but to this denomination. Whatever. Today, I visited my Christian Science friends. Now, when I say Christian Science, you may have misheard me. You may have thought, 1, that I was talking about Scientology.
L. Ron Hubbard was a black man. Truth.
Or 2, that I was talking about like creationist science. I'm looking at you, Kent Hovind, you silly willy. National Geographic? I think you mean National Pornographic. No. I'm not talking about either of those. No, my friend, Christian Science is something different. Back in the day, they were a little fast and loose with the term science. The only comparison that I know how to make is like when some of these quacks on YouTube talk about like quantum psychology. In that era, talking about science like this, kind of like spiritual sciences, was kind of trendy. Christian Science is a lesser known denomination. It's one of the gajillion novel denominations that sprouted up in the 19th century, and I'm gonna talk about it today. If you're new here, my whole shtick is that I'm an idiot, and I wear that label proudly. Rather than doing kind of like a infomercial regarding like what a denomination or a sect or a fringe movement believes, I like just visiting them and going in with as little of a preconceived notion or preconceived bias as possible. I knew a little bit about Christian Science before going down this whole rabbit hole, but not a ton. So let me give you guys the overview, because Christian Science is fascinating. It is a very, very, very wild world that breaks the conventional mold of a cult. I'm gonna use the C word. Don't change your channel yet. It breaks the mold of a cult on several different fronts in ways that you wouldn't think or imagine. Now, in this video, I'm not going to be making any hard judgment calls about whether Christian Science is or is not a cult. Because I don't know. I've literally been to like 2 or 3 services. I haven't investigated this well enough to make any sort of judgment call. However, it is often lumped together with other novel religious movements that sprouted up in the 19th century that were kind of culty. Case in point, in Walter Marvin's The Kingdom of the Cults, this is an evangelical classic that I have actually never read. Homeboy's got like 50 pages devoted to them. So, I don't know how to say this. Christian Science is very weird. It is a whirlwind of a time. It kind of slaps you around, makes you do a double take, and makes you ask, wait a minute, what? It just doesn't fit very neatly into a mold, and I'm fascinated by it. For one, Christian Science was started by a whammon in an era where we weren't even sure if women could read. So I haven't read a ton about Mary Baker Eddy, but she is the founder of the Church of Christian Science, and her writings hold a very, very, very high status in this community. We'll get there in a minute. So I'm gonna do what all modern Hollywood trailers do and spoil the surprise and tell you what this religious sect is all about. The crowning jewel of the Christian Science faith is that the physical world is not real. I'm gonna let you stew on that, and while you do, let's dive into this church that I visited today. So I've been to one other Church of Christian Science in Raleigh, but as I was perusing other Christian Science churches, I found this one up in Chapel Hill. And I said, zooey mama, that is a pretty building that is worth the 30-minute drive. So I trekked my way out there through some very sketchy weather. There was actually a severe thunderstorm warning in effect, but I persevered and pressed on. When I found the church, it was kind of tucked away into the woods. It was off to an excellent start. If you've ever played Resident Evil 4, which is one of my favorite video games, it's sort of like the beginning of that, at least this time of year in February. So I pull up to this pretty magnificent looking building kind of tucked away in the woods, and I'm looking around and I'm like, okay, there's not a whole lot of people here. There were precisely 2 cars in the parking lot. And I started to wonder, I was like, shit, did they cancel church because of the bad weather? So I was immediately bummed out a little bit, but I get out of the car and start walking towards the church, and then I hear music. So I walk into this church, walk through the foyer, and then I look into the sanctuary, and there are 3 people there. And it was one of the most curious sights that I've ever seen in my entire time of doing this. It's also very funny because like a few months back, I made a video called The Smallest Church in the World, which I thought like was an adorable gag because there were 9 people at that church. But when I walked in here, Man, that was... It was something. And I'm not gonna lie, man, with like the overcast rain, the dead trees surrounding the building, and walking into a trinity of elderly women, it was the cultiest thing I've ever seen. That's not a judgment call about the church. That is not at all a judgment call about the church. But just the optics of it, I was like, this feels like a movie. This feels like the start of a horror movie. If you are a practicing Christian Scientist, please don't leave. I'm just kidding. But it did feel like I was going to see a line of text off to the side that read something like,
Directed by Ari Aster.
I love that man, by the way. Hereditary is my favorite movie. But so even though there were not a lot of people there, I was really taken aback by how absolutely stunning this building was. I'm not gonna say this lightly. This was one of the prettiest churches that I have ever walked into. And the reason why I'm kind of excited to talk about this church is because it was kind of in the same stream as these minimalist Methodist churches, Mormon churches, even Kingdom Halls from the Jehovah's Witnesses. They fall into this category, and this was like the piece de resistance of that breed of churches. So you've heard me bitch ad nauseum about, how ugly some of these minimalist churches are. And my position has always been, like, I think that's a valid way to do it. If you want to be iconoclastic, if you want to say, hey, you're not supposed to be focusing on anything else except for the message, that doesn't mean that you have to treat your building like a sensory deprivation tank. This was a beautiful, beautiful facility that somebody spent a lot of time and attention on. Again, very minimalist vibes. There was not a picture of Jesus or the Theotokos anywhere here in this sanctuary. There were some pews, some green carpet out of the 70s that I'm gonna excuse, and a slew of big, beautiful windows. There wasn't even any stained glass at this place. It was just like you're surrounded by nature in this cozy little cocoon of a church out in the woods, and it was really beautiful. Even though it was a little weird and sad and a tiny bit creepy walking in and only seeing 3 people there, I can imagine that if this place were bursting at the seams, this would be really beautiful. So it was very obvious by the layout of this church what the center of attention was. All the pews were wrapped around the pulpit to emphasize how what was going to be spoken about was the center of the reason for being there. I mentioned that there was some music. There was a very quaint organ playing in the background, but even the organ itself was in a back room and the music was ported through the walls. Now, the most obvious and the most striking part of this whole thing was what was written on the walls behind the pulpit, right behind the reader, the person who is going to speak the thing that I'll talk about in a sec. In huge words, God is love. Beautiful, wonderful, super kosher. And then off to the left, you have a quote from Jesus. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And then the curveball, because you knew there would be one. There's a quote on the right-hand side of everything from Mary Baker Eddy. And her quote reads, "Divine love always has met and always will meet every human need." Mary Baker Eddy is going to be a big part of this video, and it's frustrating because I don't know a whole lot about her yet. This is probably a good opportunity for me to pause and talk about my methodology with, investigating churches and religious movements like this. The purpose of these videos, in part, is to kind of catalog my progression of thought. If you watch my Jehovah's Witness videos from beginning to end, you can hear some of the absolutely mind-numbing bullshit that I say at the beginning of my investigation, and then you can hear some of the more refined points that I make in my final video. I have every intention of getting names, places, ideas, and identities totally wrong. This is an opinion piece. Do your own homework. I'm much more interested in how religion feels and how it feels to the people who actually live and practice in these denominations. My purpose is not so much to ascertain every little jot and tittle about what every single group believes. It's more so to understand what is the vibe of this place? What is the soul of this place? So with that being said, Mary Baker Eddy. I don't know a whole lot about her yet. What I do know is that science and health with Key to the Scriptures is of paramount importance to this group. I don't totally know yet how they view science and health, whether they would say that it's on par with the Bible or whether they, would consider it the Third Testament. My hunch is probably not. But for all intents and purposes, you shouldn't be reading the Bible without reading science and health. And the importance of science and health is stressed in the sermon because it was literally half the sermon. Let me back up. So I walk in, I take my seat, and I am immediately noticed by the reader, and she gives me a great big warm smile. I sit through a couple of hymns, and then the reader gets up. Now, at Christian Science churches, there is no preacher per se. There is no pastor. Instead, they have a reader. And the word reader is literal here. The person who goes up and speaks does not prepare a sermon. They do not have a homily. They do not give their version of a Christian TED Talk. They literally go up there and read from this. And this, Christian Science Quarterly, is their version of a liturgy. And the liturgy is literally just quotes from the Bible and quotes from Science and Health by Mary Baker Eddy. Every time I say her name, I hear in my head the Ed, Ed, and Eddy theme song. Ed, Ed, and Eddy. The show gave me nightmares as a kid, man. So you might be asking, what is inside of Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures? Well, I don't know, because I haven't read it yet, but I'm putting it on my reading list, along with the Book of Mormon, Al-Bukhari, and a whole bunch of other books that I probably will never make my way all the way through. This is your reminder that I still work a 9-to-5 job. Support me on Patreon so that I can have more time to read, so that I can be slightly less of a moronic asshole. So Christian Science teaches ardently that the physical world is not real. Now, I'll say this from the beginning. Christian Science started as a healing cult.
I'm very grateful for Christian Science. I've witnessed hundreds, literally, of healings in my life as a Christian Scientist.
Whether or not it's a cult now is up for debate. And I'm gonna shelve that debate for now and just kind of talk about what I saw and experienced today. Mary Baker Eddy taught that the physical world is not real and the only thing that truly exists is the mind, the soul, the spirit, the ephemeral nature of reality. And because of that, your physical body, which is not truly real, can become subject to prayer, and God can heal anything through prayer. Kind of like a combination between prayer and like positive thinking, I think. So basically what that means is that sickness, cancer, syphilis, the plague, none of those are actually real. They are illusions that can be dismissed and gotten rid of through prayer. So that's the big crux of this thing. In addition to that, Mary Baker Eddy has spiced up some of the biblical text with some creative liberties. The service starts off with the Lord's Prayer. And the Lord's Prayer that is prayed is not directly from the King James Bible, as would have been normal at the time. Instead, it's a quote from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. Mary says, "Here, let me give what I understand to be the spiritual sense of the Lord's Prayer." And so then she recites it, but then adds some, key distinguishing factors to the actual Lord's Prayer. So again, this is what's recited at the beginning of the service. Our Father, which art in heaven, our Father, Mother, God, all harmonious, hallowed be thy name, adorable one. In the classical sense, one who's worthy to be adored. Thy kingdom come, thy kingdom is come, thou art ever present. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Enable us to know, as in heaven, so on earth, God is omnipotent, supreme. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And God lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from sin, disease, and death. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. For God is infinite, all-powerful, all life, truth, love over all and all. So whether or not Science and Health is actually scripture or canon here doesn't really matter, because the Lord's Prayer that's being read is Mary Baker Eddy's interpretation of the Lord's Prayer. So in addition to a lot of scripture readings, there's a lot of readings from Science and Health. So a lot of what's mentioned in Science and Health are these very illustrative, kind of ephemeral statements about God. And you hear certain phrases like love over and over and over again. And this lasted for about 40 minutes, and then sang another hymn or two, and that was it. It was a short service. It was an hour on the dot. So after the service ended, the reader walked up to me and gave me a big warm handshake and thanked me for coming. I asked if I could photograph the architecture, and she said, yeah, of course, and then I dipped. So the other thing that's worth mentioning is this Father, Mother, God business. From what I understand so far, Mary Baker Eddy had a passion for kind of making God androgynous, removing this hyper-masculine emphasis on God. And it's super weird reading and hearing all of this because a lot of it sounds like Gnosticism. And I'm in the middle of doing a deep dive on Gnosticism. I mean, I've been fascinated by it for the past decade, but now I'm actually more in the weeds trying to really parse through things between the Sethians and the Valentinians and the Marcionites. And Mary Baker Eddy would have been in the 19th century, and I don't know how many of those texts were readily available and read in her day. I don't know how much people knew about Gnosticism in her era. And my hunch is that if this woman were to have gotten her hands on like the Apocryphon of John or the Gospel of Judas, she would have been all over that shit. It's just like a weird hiccup of history that if archaeology had like progressed a little bit faster, this woman in the 19th century, in my mind, like there's an alternate universe where this woman just was the start of like a Gnostic revivalist movement. Now, comparing Christian Science to Gnosticism is almost cliche. It just feels like low-hanging fruit because the Gnostics, generally didn't like matter, and then you have the Christian Scientists who generally don't like matter. But it's more complicated than that. The Sethian Gnostics, who are represented in like the Gospel of Judas and the Apocryphon of John, they would have said that matter is created by an evil demiurge, not that it didn't exist at all. What Mary Baker Eddy is proposing is a really novel concept, at least in my mind. Even like Neoplatonists would still say that like that's real. I'm an idiot. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I'm fascinated by all of this. Furthermore, with the androgynous names of God stuff, that's kind of territory where the Gnostics do talk a little bit about. The Gnostics explicitly call God the Mother Father, and here the Christian Scientists refer to God as the Father Mother. So there's interesting parallels, but I don't want people to very quickly like dismiss this as, oh, just Gnosticism. That's why I don't like apologetics anymore, man. If the goal is just to dismiss people, then you're going to miss some of the really fine nuanced points about what makes these groups individual and what makes them unique. Because it's one of my biggest pet peeves when people are dismissive to groups or sects or even cults, and they just kind of, paint them all with one brush and wave them off with the wave of a hand. And it bugs me when atheists do it too. You have like the salty atheist who walks in a room and he's smoking a cigarette and drinking some Jameson and he's like, religion's all the fucking same, man. It's just greed and pedophiles and hellfire and brimstone. And it's like, no, idiot. That's very, very stupid. All religions are unique and quirky and different and need to be examined in their own right. So Christian Science as a movement is so unique in a lot of ways. Obviously, the kind of androgenizing of God, that's unique. The fact that it was a cult started by a woman. Again, might not be a cult now, but we're just playing fast and loose with our terms here. Stay with me. And in my encounters with these people, this is not the normal trajectory that a healing cult takes at all. So they're a healing cult and they flatly reject medicine. They say, do not take medicine, pretty much period. Now, healing cults like that are nothing new and they have, historically killed a lot of people. But what's weird about this place is that the vast majority of the people that I talked to were very non-dogmatic about it. Like, I don't know what things on the ground would have looked like in the 19th century, but here today, the disposition was sort of like, well, it's all up to you ultimately. I try not to take any medicine, but if the person sitting next to me in the pew does, that's on them. It's not my place to judge. My walk is between me and Jesus, which I have so many questions about. The other thing that is kind of surprising about this, I could be very, very wrong. But from what I've gathered so far, Christian Science is like an oddly progressive movement nowadays. Like, it's this very weird intersection between progressive ideologies and then a healing cult. So not at the church that I went to today, but the one that I went to several months back, a lot of the things that they said kind of tipped their hats that they were actually pretty left-leaning socially, which that's interesting because normally you would expect a healing cult to be a high control group in order to enforce and pressure people into not receiving medicine. But here, it was kind of laissez-faire. Now, let's set the stage a little bit for the sales pitch of Christian Science in the 19th century. This might surprise some people, but Christian Science in its heyday was a booming religious movement. It was growing like wildfire. I mean, Mary Baker Eddy had thousands and thousands of adherents. And to this day, they have hundreds or thousands of churches. I think the Reader today said that there was 12 in North Carolina alone. So like the remnants of all of this are still here. They're still felt. Their mother church is in Boston, and that place is huge. So the original sales pitch for Christian Science actually kind of made sense in the 19th century. This was before Siemens machines came in with big, beautiful MRIs and lasers and CAT scans and shit. This was back in the good old days where you would walk into a doctor's office, complain of some back pain, and he would chop off your leg and shoot your left testicle full of mercury. God, they loved mercury back then. They would like gargle with that shit. Oh God. It does look fun to play with though, let's be real. So back when medicine had the efficacy of arguing with somebody in Twitter comments, it was almost reasonable to imagine that prayer may be a better outcome than going to your local quack doctor. But now, obviously, that we're in the future, and yes, we are in the future, we can replace somebody's hip. How do you do that? That's crazy. A friend of a friend had brain surgery recently. They sent a probe through her femoral artery to her brain. That's crazy. But yeah, the sales pitch now for Christian Science, imagining that prayer is a substitute for modern medicine, it's a little bit more of a stretch when modern medicine is actually pretty decent. And that's a huge part of the reason why this church was so tiny. Christian Science largely is a dying religious movement. I mean, woof, they're dropping like flies. Part of that is that they have, from what I understand, no evangelistic outreach. They're not like Mormons, they're not like Jehovah's Witnesses. They are not primarily concerned with gaining new members. And from what I can see here, I don't know that there's even a huge emphasis on retaining members. That's why I'm so bewildered by this whole thing, because I really thought that I was going to walk into a high control group of people pressuring other people into not receiving medicine. And instead it seemed very personal. And that kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit more. And I'm still developing my thoughts on what to think about that whole thing. So really the only way that this place retains members is that you have cradle Christian Scientists who are still Christian Scientists. And I talked to 2 of the 3 women here today, and it was 2 really sweet women, one in her 50s, one probably in her 70s, and they were born into it. They've been Christian Scientists all their lives. And I can't speak for these women here today, but the last 2 women that I spoke to at the other congregation, they had been rejecting medicine their entire lives. The one woman that I spoke to, she dead ass told me that she has never so much as taken Tylenol in her entire life. It's a lot. It was a lot. They were serious about it. They put their money where their mouth was. There's a huge question mark to me about, like physical safety and physical danger. Like if you break your arm, are they allowed to like reset it? Do they think that like firefighters shouldn't do their thing of like rescuing people from burning buildings because the building's not real and the firefighter isn't real? And I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I have a lot of questions that I'm really curious about. Again, this is just me not knowing a whole lot, trying to process all this. So the history of the Church of Christian Science is that they have had a lot of scandals, understandably, because I can only speak to what I've seen here today and, at the last church that I went to, where things were pretty moderate and pretty tame. However, I'm going to assume that may have not always been the case. I have not done the deep dive in this, but my hunch, my very strong sneaking suspicion, call me Sherlock Holmes, is that I'm going to uncover a slew of lawsuits and wrongful death suits towards practitioners and preachers of Christian Science. Time and time again, these people have been criticized for not giving their children life-saving medical intervention. And I don't know what that conversation has historically looked like and what it looks like now. I'm just very intrigued. And one of the weird things that I was asking ChatGPT about is that, from what I understand, Mary Baker Eddy in her lifetime kind of ruled with a little bit of an iron fist, in that she set up the entire church in such a way, like the church's bylaws mandate that the way that it's done now is the way that it will always be done. Whereas with a lot of religious movements, there's a lot of flexibility. They can revolve and grow and adapt with the times. Heck, even the Mormons have the idea that their president is a living prophet. So there's at least a tiny bit of wiggle room on some hard things. But the way that Mary Baker Eddy set up this entire church, there really isn't any room for growth or development or changing with the culture. And because of that, it's become really, really stagnant. And the vast majority of the people who are there now are just cradle Christian Scientists. Regarding this healing thing, the other thing that Christian Scientists are known for are their reading rooms. So here in this big, huge, beautiful building, right across the street was a reading room. And from what I understand, a reading room is like half bookstore where you can buy Christian Science material and literature, and where you can also schedule prayer meetings, which are supposed to be healing prayer meetings. I have not been to a reading room yet. That's on my to-do list. In addition to that, I think they also have a midweek service, like a Wednesday night service, where it's testimony day, and people who have been praying through their infirmities or ailments go and share their testimonies. I am so wildly curious to hear how those go, because everything in me really wanted to kind of expect a culture of shame and ridicule. Like, oh my gosh, Tabitha took morphine for her femur surgery? That bitch. But instead, so far, I've really only seen, I don't know, just kind of like chill people. I even started listening to like a Christian Science health and wellness podcast. And again, just like the themes consistently are just about embracing the love of God and just being overjoyed with the love of God. And they just feel very chill. It's like the least culty cult I've ever seen. Now, on paper, it seems like this should be, sirens blaring, red flags, get the FBI in here. But on the ground, it feels so normal. Like, it's weird because there's not a whole lot of people doing this thing anymore. And I feel kind of bad for these people who, are still going through this. But because their faith is so rooted in like love and compassion and, the nice, sweet nothings about God, it feels like it has more to offer to the soul than something like the Jehovah's Witnesses do, where the only thing the Jehovah's Witnesses have is terror of the apocalypse. That and some kind of like revenge porn fantasies of God smiting all of the people who were mean to the Jehovah's Witnesses.
They will vanish like smoke as Jehovah's enemies.
However, and I shouldn't even have to bring this up, but obviously I need to, this can be a doctrine that kills people. And I know that some people will be upset that I didn't spend the whole time just berating this group, but I want to give them their due and really try to understand where they're coming from and how they see things. That being said, I have a close friend, and his father was killed by this doctrine. Now, to be fair, I don't think that the guy who was behind it was actually a Christian Science, but he was employing Christian Science ideals in his preaching. According to my friend, the way that he preached this sermon was, well, there are two fields. There's the field of faith in the spirit, and there's the field of the flesh and the physical. And you can harvest the field of the spirit by praying, or you can harvest the evil, no good, awful field of physicality by investing your time into medicine and doctors. And so my friend's dad was a doctor. And when he got a hold of this guy's doctrine, he stopped taking his diabetes medication. He stopped taking his blood pressure medication. And within a year, he died very prematurely from something that was entirely avoidable. So again, I know that some people will be upset for me for not blasting this group harder from the onset, but I want to really try to understand them before I just go in guns blazing. But ultimately, theology matters. Religion matters. And all I'll say is that I think it's important to help people think through and work through and even pray through hard issues within the framework that they're working with as a different modus operandi from just smashing down their faith. There are two different tools in your toolkit. So yeah, theology matters. Religion matters. So with all that being said, very confused by this visit and by this church and by this denomination/cult, to be continued, I guess. If you're one of the three lovely women or the organist at this Christian Science church, thank you so much. I had a wonderful time. I hope you all are well. Yeah, I should have mentioned that. So it was three women in the church, and then there at the very end, there was a dude who like walked out from the back, and he was the organist. And truthfully, he was stupid talented, because I thought the whole time it was just a CD. That is a dying art, man. Woof. My name is Jared. I'm an atheist. Go to church.